Yes, this is BB speaking.
I have Dave Burl on the other line.
I'm Diamond Dave. I'm an action figure.
19 years writing about music. Dozens of cassettes in a drawer. Get ready for conversations that time very nearly forgot. Dave's Old Interview Tapes.
Hi, I'm Indianapolis Star reporter Dave Lindquist, and welcome to Dave's Old Interview Tapes, a podcast that digs up musical conversations from an era when your cell phone wasn't smart and being on MySpace wasn't dumb. Today's episode revisits an April 1999 interview with B.B. King, the blues music icon who died in 2015 at age 89. We'll hear B.B. talk about pre-show butterflies.
You're scared, and you hope they'll like you.
We'll hear him talk about dressing to impress.
You never go on stage looking like the people that came to see you.
And hear him pay tribute to a fellow guitarist.
There's never been a guitarist better than Wes Montgomery.
Our in-studio guest for this episode of Dave's Old Interview Tapes is Matthew Socey, host and producer of The Blues House Party and Film Sociology, and producer of Stolen Moments for WFYI. Matt, how are you?
I'm all right, Dave. Good to see you. Usually we see each other at music venues, but now it's quieter.
Can you tell me a little bit about your personal history with B.B. King?
I think the first time I saw B.B. King was on, of all things, an episode of Sanford & Son.
Wow. Back
in the 70s. He had made an appearance on the show as himself, and Fred, of course, trying to hornswoggle his way into B.B. King's life, and of course the one who did know Riley was Aunt Esther. The first time I saw him in concert was, I think, summer after my junior year of college. It was at the Old Deer Creek, and it was one of those great package tours of B.B. King, Buddy Guy, Dr. John, the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and then the two local bands. I remember Yank Rochelle and Duke Tomato.
Wow.
That was a great lineup.
You come out at 3 o'clock and you don't leave
Exactly. The last time I saw him, I took my daughter. Mm-hmm. And when he played down in Bloomington.
Oh, great.
Deep into what I call his blues grandpa phase. Because if I remember right, I think the first time I saw him at Deer Creek might have been the only time I saw him perform standing up. Yeah. Correct. The rest of the time it was sitting down. And the stories, especially near the end, maybe were a little longer, but it was cool. He was still in good. That's why when we heard, the last couple shows he did were a little not up to snuff. Right. It was sad because we never ever thought something, we never ever thought he'd go. Yeah. I think today even, people who don't know blues music, people who couldn't tell the difference between Sonny Boy Williamson and Sonny Liston, or Sonny Boy Williamson 1 and 2 for that matter, they know the name B.B. King.
So Dave's Old Interview Tapes, the podcast, originated when the Indianapolis Star moved offices from Pennsylvania Street down to our current site in Circle Center Mall. And what happened was, I was moving from that office to this one. I opened a drawer. Here are all these interview tapes from 1998 when I started at the Star through 2004 when I moved to digital recording. Mm-hmm. So I thought, you need to repurpose and recycle these conversations. This particular one with B.B. King is one of my all-time most memorable interviews. It was really a great opportunity to speak with an icon, and it was a highly anticipated show because it was the very first Indie Jazz Fest, 1999. Mm-hmm. He was one of the headliners, and the lineup was just unbelievable.
I saw him there. I worked the volunteer booth at that first Indie Jazz Fest. Yeah, great show for Mr. King that year.
And his particular day, the blues stage that day, included B.B., his long-time pal, Bobby Bland.
So we didn't have to go up to Maryville because they always played every February, March, I believe, up in Maryville. It was a big blues show up there.
Susan Tedeschi played that day with 2 members of Double Trouble.
Yep.
Let's see, not Clifton Chenier.
C.J. Chenier.
C.J. Yeah.
Yep, his son.
Yeah. So it was an action-packed stage, and I spoke with B.B. He was overseas in Birmingham, England. And the night before, he had played in Dublin, and he could not have been more generous with his time. We spoke for about 25 minutes, and I'd say the thread of our conversation had to do with live performance. He was a man in his 70s already at that point, and he was playing more than 200 gigs a year. And I just wanted to maybe get a peek inside of how he approached live shows.
It's a good feeling, yes. A great feeling, yes. But it's sort of like meeting your in-laws for the first time. You get butterflies.
Is that right?
Like you're scared, and you hope they'll like you.
Okay.
For you being yourself. Otherwise, you're hoping that you don't have to change to try to, to be accepted.
Right.
And I've had to go through that many years. You're on the show with different kind of talents. And people that hire you know that you're a blues singer, blues musician, and a lot of the people come to see you know that as well. But then you got the other people, who is that? My God, I got that old blues singer. I've had to go through that so much of my life. But I finally got to the place where it doesn't bother me as much. You go out and do what you're hired to do and what the people that know you came to see. And you do the best you can do.
So I was a little taken aback. It was 1999. I was still relatively green at this job, and I just thought, if you're B.B. King, one night, the next night, you're gonna roll. You have no problem. But you and I were speaking earlier, and you also had a thought similar to his, that every night should bring a certain feeling.
Yeah, I direct and act in plays whenever possible, and even directing, I'm pacing back and forth, and people backstage in the green room are kind of surprised, because I've been doing theater for a while, and for me it's always been, if you're not at least a little bit nervous, it means you don't care. And even when I do the house party, I mean, am I pacing? No, but I may have to take a breath and exhale deeply, and then, okay, here comes the show.
Yeah.
I think, if I remember, and I'm paraphrasing, I believe Laurence Olivier once said, there's nothing wrong with having the butterflies in your stomach so long as you have them flying in the same direction.
Okay.
And
yeah.
I think that's probably what BB does.
Adrenaline?
I mean, there's got to be a little bit of work ethic to that.
What also struck me during this conversation, that, again, as someone at the pinnacle of a genre, he didn't take things for granted. I think he always felt like there was more work for him to do. And I'd like to play a clip where he talks about kind of gaining ground.
As long as I've been in this business now, 50 years professionally, I would have worked a week to get a salary as some of the rock and roll or soul people get.
Right.
That's changed now. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's changed. Now I get, I'm treated from our company, MCA, like a major recording star.
He didn't say it, but I understood what he meant. He's like, one night for a rock star is a week for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you are very well versed in blues. That's kind of the way it is, right?
There were a lot of musicians in the first half and the middle part of the 20th century that got taken by studios, by promoters, by record labels. So yeah, and so for a lot of them, it was, you had to make your money on the road. And so the fact that you have somebody like a B.B. King or a Buddy Guy who at least are having a comfortable third act in their life/career.
Right.
Now B.B., here was a man who was, I think, at one point doing 260, 270 shows a year. He had a lot of kids.
That's also
he
true.
did have a lot of kids, so I know part of it was that. I think part of it was also, the band. I mean, he had a big group. He was not doing the B.B. King trio.
Right.
I mean, there's a reason why big bands didn't tour as much after the 1950s. There's a lot of mouths.
Overhead.
There's a lot of mouths to feed, and B.B. didn't scrimp. You know, he did not cut corners. So, you know, from his dress to his show, and I think part of it was you got your money's worth. You really got your money's worth out of him, even deep into the quote unquote blues grandpa phase.
Well, that segs perfectly, Matt, because one of the things I wanted to talk to BB about was his sartorial splendor. When you went to see BB, he's dressed. The band's dressed. Mm-hmm. All the instruments are shining. They had like a bandstand kind of production.
I don't know if he fined musicians. Like James Brown was famous for finding. Right. You know, a lot of those older guys were famous for that. You know, but yeah, they were tighter than a witch's elbow, and you know, there was not that many off notes. And if they were off notes, it was from BB, and he'd be the first to kind of give you the oops face and that sort of thing. But he expected his band to be on it, and he didn't have to be Buddy Rich, and he didn't have to be Maynard Ferguson and do it in front of people. Of course, now with social media, you see a lot more candid photographs. It was rare to find a picture of B.B. King backstage without a jacket.
B.B. touches on that very point in this clip about dressing and just physical presentation.
Well, the people that I admired mostly, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Benny Goodman, Woody Herman, Lionel Hampton. I could just name you all the greats to me at that time. And their thing was you never go on stage looking like the people that came to see you. Right. I believe in that. I believe that if I want to be impressive, I should try to look impressive. I should try to dress a way that the people would be kind of glad to see me like that. So I'm from the old school. I gotcha. I've never had that beautiful physique like some of the men could show their chest and all that, and no shirt unders and all that. I didn't look that good in the beginning, so I think I'd better keep what I have covered and try to build on it if I can.
However, there are some photos of him performing in the 1950s in shorts.
Oh no.
Yeah. So
we've actually touched on shorts on stage on this podcast, the very early days of our podcast. That's going to be our thing. A reference to shorts on stage.
And Rufus Thomas, the world's oldest teenager. I saw him at the Chicago Blues Fest for his 80th birthday in pink, in a pink jacket and pink shorts. I don't know if it's the same outfit he wore in the film Wattstax, but that's what he did. But he was allowed to pull that off. You and I are not.
Yeah, like Angus Young.
Yeah,
he's like the exception that proves the rule in terms of shorts on stage.
But yeah, you're right about I mean, impeccably dressed. Even in the '60s when he was playing with CCR or the Grateful Dead, you know, I mean those great kind of Fillmore shows where you kind of take a dartboard and go, okay, here's our headliner and here's our openers. Sure, why not? I mean, that kind of thing was very, very cool. You know, James Cotton and Junior Wells dressed a little differently, but yeah, BB was also got away with wearing sequins, kind of like that Charles Brown, Tyrone Davis, Johnny Taylor sequin jacket world. Yeah.
So again, we're turning back the clock to the very first Indie Jazz Fest, and Indie Jazz Fest is still around. It's not the same type of event it was at the beginning. When we look at festivals in America, they're very popular now. They're huge now. Your Bonnaroos, your Coachellas, your Lollapaloozas, single-site, multi-day festivals. The original Indie Jazz Fest was built with that idea in mind, but with a very different artistic band. What was your impression of the early Indie Jazz Fest?
I got to see a lot of acts. I got to MC for the likes of... Actually, the two people who I MC'd for who I never met. That's another. One was Bonnie Raitt, and the other was John Legend. I got to interview John for that other publication, but I never got to shake hands with him. And the Bonnie Raitt one, she played for about 50 minutes, and then Mother Nature kind of came a call in, and it got rained out. But I got to see a lot of great artists. It was fun seeing Brad Mehldau, except he was getting drowned out by unintentional backup vocals by Shaggy.
Oh, right.
Because it bled over
Yes.
at Military Park. But seeing Chick Corea with Bella Fleck,
Yep.
hanging out with Foreplay, meeting Herbie Hancock is the man who changed my point of view of music
Nice.
when I was a teenager. Hanging out with Freddie Hubbard. So
Wow.
from a schmoo and full disclosure, my first year, as I said, I volunteered in the volunteer booth, and I met Jason Karansky, the then managing editor of Downbeat, and that led to me freelancing for them for a dozen years.
There you go.
He didn't have an Indiana writer.
Now, just last year, the day's tribute to Wes Montgomery at IUPUI's campus center, I thought was one of the best produced, most innovative programming for music that I've seen in my 19 years here.
That tribute with Pat Martino, but it was a throwback to the old outdoor festival thing of let's have somebody from the West Coast, let's get somebody from the East Coast, let's
Right.
get some local guys, and let's throw them together because they all love West and they're all great and they can bounce off each other. Yeah, that was a really really kind of cool throwback to the outdoor festival days.
Now, on the topic of Wes Montgomery, B.B. King knows his music, of course, and knows Indianapolis, and he had some very nice things to say about Wes.
There's never been a guitarist better than Wes Montgomery. Never, ever, ever. And I don't think ever will be. Not in jazz, not in blues, not in anything else. Maybe classical, but never anything else.
And did your paths cross with him?
Oh, yes. I had a chance to meet him once. Yeah, he was a very warm, talented man.
I remember B.B. King name dropping Wes Montgomery, and that's a compliment. That's not a dig. But I always remember him saying him talking about Wes Montgomery and his influences is, I think, the music nerd equivalent to a rock star wearing a sports jersey in the town that you were in. So
Okay.
instead BB didn't have to wear a Colts or a Pacers jersey. All he had to do is drop Wes Montgomery or another person that would drop Yank Rochelle, somebody like that. So yeah, very very cool.
So one of the things that we find when we look at Dave's old interview tapes are miscues and gaffes on the part of your host. When I was speaking with BB, and we already listened to the clip where he was talking about how he dressed on stage, I was trying to ask him about influences in terms of presentation on stage, but I think I botched the question, and he rattled off just his musical influences, which now, all these years later, and now that BB isn't here, I really appreciate this clip more than I did at the time when I was just going, "Dope, that's not what I asked you."
So at the time you felt like you had wasted his
Right.
minute or so
Right.
on that. Because ladies and gentlemen, we sometimes when an interview like this, we are allotted X amount of time, and we're trying to bang out as many questions as we can. And of course, you're always fishing for quotes. So I've been there. I understand it.
Even though I wasn't expecting to hear what I was being told, I do get excited when he's rattling off some of these names. It's just an interview thing, and I listen back to this, I'm like, oh, you should have had a better response when he said Django Reinhardt, and you'll hear that I said nothing. But anyway, this is really amazing when B.B. King talks about people who influenced him.
At the beginning, I was a blues singer and a guitarist, acoustic guitarist at the time, called Lonnie Johnson. I'm not sure if Lonnie Johnson was born in northern Louisiana or southern Mississippi, but somewhere near the line. And I was crazy about him. I was a Texas blues singer and acoustic guitarist called, his name was Lemon Jefferson, but I was told he was born blind, so they called him Blind Lemon.
Yes, of course.
Then I liked jazz. I was an Oklahoma-born jazz guitarist called Charlie Christian.
Right.
I was crazy about him. And then I had a friend that went in service the same time I did in 43. And he was stationed in France, and he heard of a place called the Hot Club of France. And at the Hot Club of France, featured was a guitarist called Django Reinhardt. When my friend came back to the States, he brought me records of Django Reinhardt, so I fell in love with him. And then finally I heard of a guy called T-Bone Walker playing electric guitar, single string, and then I went crazy for the guitar, and I've been crazy for it ever since.
When somebody of that stature rattles off artists, do you go and then right after the interview start listening to who he talked about? Have you ever had that happen?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Because it's, it's that whole thing of, okay, we're at the source. Oh, we can go deeper.
Yep.
Here's a little closer to the source.
Say what you will about Stevie Ray Vaughan and Eric Clapton, but they always name drop their influences. Buddy Guy still does a medley of, in his live shows of Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and Muddy Waters and Johnny Hooker and all that. So, and thanks to people, Vaughan talked about the Three Kings and Lonnie Mack and, W.C. Clark. So hopefully you go and check out who influenced them. Even if you're trying to find an influence, does B.B. King play or sound like Django Reinhardt or Wes Montgomery? Not necessarily, but it's fun to try to build that music bridge.
What I always find interesting is when I think about, okay, what was BB's innovation? And I've, in my own mind, just always come back to the single line solo. And right there in that clip, he talked about T-Bone Walker as influencing him in doing that.
Yeah, it took a while for me to, in my youth, to figure out that he didn't play and sing at the same time. And I think we're used to singers singing 1,000 notes and playing 1,000 notes at the same time, and it was kind of his own call and response. And T-Bone Walker was like that. Right. And if you hear, especially old blues tunes, you sing a verse, you hit a riff, no matter what the instrument is. I always remember the story of when BB collaborated with U2 for Rattle and Hum, and and I think the lads asked him to play a chord, and he's like, I don't play chords, and then makes the motion with his wrist. He goes, I do this, and makes that specific B.B. King note-bending sound that, the wrist of steel. So U2 was humbled, like, well, yes, of course you do that, sir. Yes, we'll work with that. And that's where Love Comes to Town comes into play.
Yeah, great song. Well, that's just interesting in itself because The Edge is not a conventional guitar player. Did you happen to see the film It Might Get Loud?
I love It Might Get Loud. Also, let's just take a dartboard and get these three guys together and start. You know what? I have it on disc. I kind of wish there was more jams, but the talking, which kind of built to the jam near the end, but seeing all of that gear, and they show it in the trailer of, yes, this is the Edge sound, and it all starts with this very kind of thin, almost tinny sound. That's a fun documentary.
I kind of felt like he was the odd man out, just because of the unconventional ways he plays. But when Jack White and Jimmy got going, that was
also in their own zip codes.
Yeah. But there was a tractor beam of guitarness between those guys.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of I wish they'd make more of those.
Right.
It's like ESPN has 30 for 30.
Yeah.
They've already done 30. Now they just kind of keep the name and keep making them. So we would love It Might Get Loud, the anthology series, please.
That's $1 million idea.
I get credit.
Okay.
And partial check every quarter.
So it was 1999, and there were years when I would try to ask one question of every celebrity I interviewed, so at the end of the year I could kind of tie it up into a bow. And in it being 1999, the end of a century, I was asking, hey, if you had one album that you could listen to, the old Desert Island Disc concept, what would your one album be? And BB sidestepped that, but gave me something perhaps even more valuable.
I wouldn't know what to tell you. So many great people that I like and like so much. To just pick an album on one of them, I don't know. I don't know who I would pick. Okay. I really don't. If you ask me what song by an artist, I would tell you that the song Willie Nelson does called Always on My Mind.
Yeah.
That would be my favorite song.
Yeah. What about that song is
Well, it's like it's kind of me daily. I have friends around the world, a lot of friends I grew up with at home in Mississippi and so on. I'm not in contact with them often. but they are always on my mind, like now.
Right.
First thing I think about is some of them.
Yeah.
Second tune would be Lionel Richie, Once, Twice, Three Times.
Yeah.
That would be my second song. And third is one I recorded myself. Nobody bought it but me, I don't think. It's called A Mother's Love. And those are my three tunes that I would think of.
If you had 10,000 guesses, would you have picked that trifecta? No, not at all. That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's really, and I'm trying to remember if King and Nelson collaborated, because he did do 2 duet albums,
Right.
Blues Party and Deuces Wild. I don't know. I'd have to check. I'm in a studio without internet. Sorry, but I think that's really cool because I think we expect. When you're talking to somebody of a genre, you
Sure.
kind of expect them to maybe quote their genre or
Right.
listen to their genre, or even in this case blues or jazz because they're related, not the same. But yeah, that was a nice curveball. That was very cool.
To match the wonder of a mother's love.
Matthew, we just heard B.B. King talk about some of his favorite songs. Let me pose this question to you.
Yes.
Do you have a handful of favorite B.B. King songs?
Besides Thrill Is Gone,
Right.
Obvious choice. Everybody does that one. It's fine. Nothing wrong with it. I played it. I did not even play Mustang Sally when Wilson Pickett died.
Right.
But I did play Thrill Is Gone when BB died. No, 3 that come to mind immediately. How Blue Can You Get?
Yes.
Which is kind of a Blues 101 song. And yes, it's fun to hear the dated things like $10 Dinner and
Yep.
Brand New Ford, but it's still very, very telling. And the call and response that he does to himself
Right.
is always fun. Sweet Little 16.
Okay.
Both are from what I think is an essential, not just a blues album, but an essential album, Live at the Regal. It's just
Definitely.
one of the all-time great live albums. And the third, for personal reasons, his version of the Leon Russell tune Hummingbird
Oh, okay.
from Indianola, Mississippi Seeds. It reminds me of my mom, and I get old and squishy and kind of sun-like.
nice.
So, but yeah, that was that period. Like he was working with Leon Russell, so it was heavily orchestrated with big vocals. It was because Thrill Is Gone was, I think, one of the first songs of that era, blues tunes especially, to have a string section. And he kind of, with Leon Russell, expanded that a little bit with horns and strings and big backup singers. There have been horns, of course, like T-Bone Walker and the big band stuff back in the 40s and 50s, but nothing quite like that. And that was another mainstream move for BB, along with being on those bills that we talked about
Right.
at the Fillmore.
Now, I'm familiar with the countrypolitan movement that brought orchestration and strings to Nashville. Now, when BB was doing the stuff that you're talking about, did he get pushback?
I don't think he did at that time because there was I think I called it the Great Caucasian Blues Renaissance, and that was when white artists, not just in England, we all know about Clapton and John Mayall and the gang from Fleetwood Mac, but Charlie Musselwhite, Mike Bloomfield, Paul Butterfield, Elvin Bishop, they were playing it, and also white audiences were getting turned on to it from the folk blues boom in the 60s, and the fact that guys like B.B. King and James Cotton and Junior Wells and Buddy Guy were on the same bills as the Grateful Dead and CCR and Canned Heat. No, it wasn't so much that on his. And I know he did, like a few artists did, he did some sort of all-star albums. Like he did an album in London with Ringo Starr and Steve Winwood, which is very similar to what Chess did. Chess did some London sessions. Chess did psychedelic rock. The glossy stuff that BB did in the 70s and 80s, not so much a pushback, but that was just kind of if you listen to them, they're extremely dated. And it's kind of a little history of that time and that era of recording.
Now, I had jotted down 3 songs. We matched one of them.
Uh-huh.
How Blue Can You Get?
Baby, how blue can you get?
My other 2, one is Paying the Cost to Be the Boss.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
And my third comes from that kind of 80s, like, dated window. I just love that song he did for the movie, Into the Night.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one too. Yeah, and look, I'm I'm a huge Michelle Pfeiffer fan, but I remember that song more than I do that film.
Right. Who was the male lead? Was that
That's
Goldblum?
Jeff Goldblum,
Yeah.
and David Bowie had a cameo. John Landis directed it. I do a film show. of
Yeah,
course.
we're bleeding into another area of
But
expertise. This
I think
is awesome.
that might be one of those underrated ones where the album is more memorable than the film itself, and that's another podcast for another time.
I'll go out of my mind into the night.
I don't know if I've conveyed this, but in 1999, it was just a thrill to be on the phone with
See what
B.B.
you did
King.
there.
I can't believe I did that because in this clip I'm going to play, he himself has a thrill reference that I know was not intentional. What I wanted to talk to BB about was his honorary title. I think just is unquestionable, and it's the Goodwill Ambassador of the Blues.
I like that. I didn't ask for it. I have worked all my life for it, but I didn't ask for it. And when first time I heard it, I went to Portugal. The USA had a pavilion there during the World Fair. This was last year, I believe. Last year or year before last. And they billed me as the ambassador of the blues. Right. And man, I was so shocked and so happy. Till now, when they say it, it really gives me a thrill.
He did it.
He did it. He's allowed to, I think.
No question. No question. Well, Matthew, this has been a treat. Again, it's so fun to have people come on Dave's old interview tapes and just fill us with knowledge and perspective.
Anytime, Dave. This has been a lot of fun.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for another episode of Dave's Old Interview Tapes.